Hello YouTube, this is DVD Review Studios here, and today I shall be doing a brief follow-up video to a video that I made a few weeks ago, looking at some customized DVD sets that I had made for movies and TV shows that sadly had not received a physical media release. And so in a similar vein, today we're going to be looking at just the one Blu-ray release this time, and that is of course for Star Wars The Clone Wars The Final Season, since my Clone Wars collection on Blu-ray was feeling very much incomplete without this very essential entry. And with this show, at the moment at least anyway, for the final season being exclusively streamable only on Disney+, I was a little bit disappointed with that fact, since obviously it would have been great to have the entirety of the series on Blu-ray. And so I took it upon myself to design this Blu-ray set, so the artwork is designed by myself in Photoshop, and I thought it would be a great opportunity, one, to obviously look into and talk about what decisions I made when designing this set, but also to talk about the final season as a whole, since I very much enjoyed it, and it'd be a great excuse to pair this video up with the rest of my other Clone Wars related reviews. Looking into the cover art, before we do go any further, I would like to say that I'm going to try and treat this as sort of a preliminary design, just because as I've looked at this, there are a couple of things that I have noticed that I'm not overly fond of with this particular final cut, I guess you could say. There are still a couple of tweaks here and there that I would very much like to make before I do finalize this, such as with this Clone Wars logo being slightly drifting off there to the left, and there's still some shading and recolorization I need to do on Ahsoka, especially with this lightsaber. But other than that, I'm very happy with how this front cover design did turn out. The choice to have both Ahsoka and Captain Rex on there was quite an obvious one, with some of these finale episodes focusing primarily on those two characters. But anyhow, this cover art does work really well when paired up with the other seasons, so as another example of prominence with a character, with Yoda and one of his Kamino troopers, we had loads of great episodes set on Kamino and the Lost Missions. Yoda's journey through the Force, discovering Darth Bane, that was a great segment of episodes. So matching these covers with prominent characters from the season, I definitely thought was a great idea. And then with the rest of this cover design, I felt it was kind of plain with just the orangey style star line background that I took from the poster for the Clone Wars final season. So I thought I would add the crashing Venator from the Siege of Mandalore on there, which was a last-minute design and was definitely something that I felt I kind of rushed, but I do, in retrospect, think now that it has actually turned out very well. My thinking behind that and the way I designed it was that I thought just the nosedive look of it from when it bursts out of hyperspace after Darth Maul literally sabotages the hyperdrive engines, going full-on Starkiller mode. I thought this worked out very well for that front angle view, and it was very difficult actually to get a view of the Venator off Google Images that actually had this sort of shot. So this is actually a toy of the Venator that I took off of YouTube in this pose, and I just decided to cover it up and add as much detail as I possibly could to disguise that fact. So these partially translucent smoke effects I thought worked very well, the debris surrounding it, the electrical impulses, etc. So as a whole, I think that actually turned out pretty well, and it's a nice nod obviously to the Siege of Mandalore episodes throughout the Order 66 sequence. For the spine, I didn't really do anything too special, just obviously Blu-ray logo, Clone Wars final season. The little extra add-on that I thought would be a neat touch is the 332nd Ahsoka clone trooper there with the Disney Plus logo. And with the Blu-ray case being the thin style, very much the same as the Lost Missions, compared to a standard Blu-ray case, I thought that would definitely be a neat touch as a whole, and overall looks pretty good on display with the rest of them on the shelf. For the back cover, this is where it doesn't look as good in my opinion, sadly, and that's just literally due to the printing format that I used to try and get the front cover out as best as I could. But in turn, sadly, that washed out a lot of the coloration on the back cover design, especially with this glowing red around Darth Maul in particular. So it's sadly not come out as good as I was hoping it would, but overall for the design itself I'm very happy with the actual look of it. So with the images that we've taken there, one from each of the 3 story arcs featured on the final season, the inclusion of bonus features, which is something that I really wanted to do, especially with the idea that I had to include the original Bad Batch arc story reels In the same essence that in the Lost Missions Blu-ray set on the bonus features, we had the 4 additional story reels for the Crystal Crisis on Utapau in their unfinished form. And so to have the Bad Batch available in that style as well, which I think they've been long since deleted from YouTube, unfortunately. But I downloaded them a while ago, and I was very lucky to still have those files available. So I thought I would burn them onto the discs and include them as bonus features, along with a load of the other animatic sort of shorts and stuff that they had from some of the unfinished episodes, such as Cad Bane versus Boba Fett, the fantastic story reels that we had for Dark Disciple. They were definitely some of my personal favorites. And anyhow, that's pretty much all I have to say about the front cover design. And I did also do some inside artwork behind the 2 burnable discs that I've done. So here's a vague look, I guess you could say, just obviously with this being a Blu-ray case, you can't quite see it in full detail. But it is there. I'll put an image of what this actually looks like on screen now, just so you can see it properly. But it's literally just detailing what episodes are on which disc, along with breaking it down to the 3 individual story arcs. So we have obviously the Bad Batch, Ahsoka's Walkabout, the Siege of Mandalore, and the bonus features there remaining on the second disc. And as a little bonus inclusion, as a little nod to the very last scene in the Clone Wars, I thought I would include the silhouette of Darth Vader picking up the blue lightsaber of Ahsoka's that he gifts her at the very start of the Siege of Mandalore. And yeah, as a whole, I'm actually very happy with how the inside cover art did turn out. Going through the episodes, as I did mention before, there are 12 in total, split over 3 individual story arcs. The first of which being The Bad Batch, which is a story arc that we have actually technically already seen before. I say that obviously referring to the story reels that came out from Star Wars Celebration 2015, where we had the complete stories in terms of the audio format, but sadly the animation was unfinished, but it gave a decent enough representation as to what was going on in the episodes, and they were still considered to be canon as well. So it was still good to know that at least the Bad Batch were technically part of Clone Wars, but with these 4 episodes finally being released in finalized animation, even with a couple of changes made, which I do kind of disagree with to an extent, it's great to see how these characters really have hit quite a high note. And I say that since obviously with how popular they have actually become, there's a Disney Plus series in the works for them as a spin-off from the Clone Wars taking place post-Order 66. And for these characters to have clearly made such a lasting impact, I'm very intrigued to see what will happen for them in the near future. And for these episodes alone, they were overall incredibly entertaining, especially for a clone-centric story, obviously primarily focusing on the Bad Batch, but also sharing that stage light with Captain Rex, since his story was quite critical in this particular storyline with the involvement of the character of Echo. And that character was someone that we presumed to have died back in Season 3, but was not a confirmed death, I guess you could say. But the big reveal in the episode of Distant Echo was a great attempt at creating a jump scare moment of Echo's deformed body. For the animation portion of things, I was actually quite surprised at how cinematic this story arc actually looked as a whole, particularly with the first episode and how the shot actually looks like a camera shot, and the way the long shots and pan shots actually continued and were elongated as opposed to quick cuts between characters. It definitely emphasized the action and was overall very rewarding in terms of how long-lasting these shots were in particular. For the negatives, there were a couple of creative decisions that I did disagree with when it came to comparing the finalized animation to the story reels. Particularly, I wasn't a big fan of the Anakin and Padme sequence, which was okay, but it just seemed incredibly forced, and for having humorous moments that were slightly awkward where Rex was supposed to not necessarily recognize what Anakin was doing but trying to cover for him as well. It just didn't really work in my personal opinion. And I was a little bit annoyed that the nose art joke was removed as well, but I guess if that was included as well as the evocative Anakin and Padme scene, that would have just cheapened the overall emotion invested with that kind of relationship.
She can negotiate with me anytime.
Other than that, the only other scene that really irked me was the removal of the organic Decimator segment, where Anakin and Wat Tambor are arguing, and Wat Tambor decides to show Anakin what the organic decimator will actually do, and he tests it on one of the local villager characters and just obviously reduces him to a puddle. And with that scene being removed from the final animation, I can see why to a certain extent, but the pacing really seems all over the place for that beginning sequence of the episode in the third one, where Tech is trying to disconnect Echo from the science experiment. It just doesn't really add up as far as the timeline seems to go, but I guess if the pacing was the only issue and that was the only scene they could have removed, it does work to that angle. But other than that, I was just really disappointed that, again, a brutal Star Wars scene was just neglected and completely erased. Aside from those couple of gripes, this really was a great opening story arc to the final season of the Clone Wars. It's great to see these characters now becoming very popular characters, to say the least. And overall, I thought the ending was very good in the episode Unfinished Business, seeing a little bit of a darker angle to Anakin, and finally putting Admiral Trench to death. It's been a long time coming, considering how many times he's cheated death at this point. And I really did actually enjoy the ending to this version in comparison to the original story arc, where Echo is actually welcomed into the Bad Batch to become one of them, considering how different he has become since he's not quite the same man anymore. So I thought that episode was definitely a lot better rather than just overall acceptance that the Bad Batch characters seem to have in the original story reels. So overall, for a clone-centric story, this was definitely a great opening story arc to the final season. The next 4 episodes make up the Ahsoka's Walkabout story arc, which was originally intended for Season 6 of the show, before obviously the cancellation, where we'd primarily focus on Ahsoka looking at her life after the events of the Season 5 finale, where she actually left the Jedi Order, and so this would more or less pick up finding her life to be very different from what it originally was, as she goes on not only a path of self-discovery, but also realizes just what effect the war has actually had on random citizens. And that's where we are introduced to the character in the original variation of this arc of Nick Sakami, who is basically a Han Solo-esque smuggler from my understanding, and was also thought to be somewhat of a love interest to Ahsoka as well. And so, with Ahsoka basically getting caught up in the events of this character's life, I would presume that the way the story arc in the final season actually played out, it would have played out in a similar degree, only with Ahsoka learning similar lessons without the annoyance of the Martez sisters. With the two one-dimensional characters we are given that simply juxtapose one another, what they accomplish could have easily been achieved with one singular character, i.e. Nix. And that's why I really do wish we could have gotten the original interpretation of this particular story arc, simply because of how repetitive and constrained for time it feels throughout the duration of it. For what these characters actually represent, we have Trace Martez, who is a very easily led, very easily manipulated character who doesn't quite seem to understand the world around her. And that is a progressive arc over the course of these 4 episodes, where she does suddenly realize, after coming in contact with the Pikes, how brutal and cruel the world of crime really is. And speaking of which, we have Rafa Martez, who is somewhat a wannabe kind of crime boss who wants to be in charge of her own finances, who pretentiously thinks of herself as being far superior to those around her, who has a soft spot for her sister, but also wants to be in control in every situation and thinks of herself really as a very easy manipulator of both her sister and other people, trying to put her sister's best interests in mind first when it's not really like that, and that becomes again more evident over the course of the story arc. And the sequence that forces this realization comes from Ahsoka, who suddenly learns that the Jedi aren't really all what they are made out to be, and that there are actually quite a lot of negative stereotypes of the Jedi taken into consideration with the war as well. And that's where we learn that the parents of the Martez sisters were actually killed during the events of Season 1, during the hostage crisis episode where Cad Bane breaks out Zura the Hutt from prison, and throughout that carnage, supposedly the Martez sisters' parents were actually killed. And with that kind of throwback, I was kind of surprised actually of them referencing season 1. But other than that mild bit of character progression towards the latter stages of this story arc, I do feel that this could have been done a lot better. But in terms of positives for the latter couple of episodes, I really did enjoy the somewhat reintroduction of Darth Maul, knowing that after seeing him we would be going into the Siege of Mandalore afterwards. That was definitely a great inclusion. I quite enjoyed the time that we spent with the Pike Syndicate, especially the character of Mark Graham, who we don't spend too much time with throughout the Clone Wars. I did really enjoy his minor feature moments in the novel Dark Disciple, but if we're able to get any more content from the prequels beyond this, it would be great to see more of his character in the not too distant future. And the way the episode ended with Bo-Katan, who had been observing Ahsoka throughout the entirety of this arc, finally approaches her and asks for her help in getting rid of Maul. That was definitely a great way to end the episode, and the excitement leading into the Siege of Mandalore was unbelievable and very memorable from when these episodes originally aired. And so this conveniently takes us into the finale story arc, the Siege of Mandalore, which isn't presented in the usual way the Clone Wars episodes are done. This feels very much like it could be integrated into a full finale bookend style movie, and I say that since the intros are no longer present with each individual episode, which are usually narrated by Tom Kane. Instead, we just have a brief flash of a title card and then we go straight into the action, and I loved that about these 4 episodes. They were absolutely phenomenal. And so with the first episode, Old Friends Not Forgotten, everyone is basically reintroduced to one another as the mission is laid out in front of everybody. So we have the clones reintroduced, Anakin and Obi-Wan are now back with Ahsoka, and the mission is for Obi-Wan and Anakin to rescue Chancellor Palpatine, and Ahsoka and Rex and the clone troopers of the 332nd Squad, which is basically made up of some of the 501st, are instructed to go with Bo-Katan to take Maul captive and take back Mandalore for Bo-Katan. And so the parting of ways is a phenomenal sequence and quite evocative, where Anakin turns his back on Ahsoka for the last time, and they never actually see each other again in this particular way until Star Wars Rebels. So there was definitely quite a heart-wrenching moment to see these characters depart. But the events following surprisingly intertwine and take place during the events of Revenge of the Sith. Only it's all from Ahsoka's side, so the continuation is definitely on point. And the best example of this I can give is from the speech that Mace Windu gives in Revenge of the Sith, where he declares that he senses a plot to destroy the Jedi. And that conversation, when it was supposed to wrap up, continues with Ahsoka in the room with Rex. And I absolutely love that continuity. It was great attention to detail. My favourite episode from the final story arc was easily The Phantom Apprentice, and this is from where Maul tries to work with Ahsoka, revealing all that he knows about Anakin, and that he was actually trying to lure Anakin to kill him to put an end to Palpatine's grand plan, and where Ahsoka refuses to believe this, igniting one of the most fantastic animated fight sequences. The choreography used through motion capture technology was unbelievable, and they actually got the original Darth Maul body actor Ray Park to reprise his role for the stunts, and the attention to detail throughout this entire sequence was absolutely jaw-dropping. And so when Maul is inevitably captured, it really does show his true fear of Palpatine, which is something we only got a mild inclination of to begin with, and something that I really wish we had seen in an animated version of the Son of Dathomir comic. But when Maul is captured, this is when Order 66 comes into play, where Palpatine executes the order and the clones, including Rex, turn on Ahsoka, and it's an absolutely phenomenal scene to watch, where Rex really isn't behaving as himself, and he tries to resist the order, but obviously he can't. And this is somewhat contradictory, since originally Rex was meant to take his inhibitor chip out of his head, following on from what he witnessed with Fives in the Lost Missions. So it's not overly inconsistent, thankfully, and Fives is still an influence, which is a great callback. And then we have the events of the final episode, which are both incredibly evocative and somewhat unexpected as well, where Darth Maul is let loose on the Venator, which he causes to basically crash out of hyperspace, which is now slowly descending onto a nearby planet. And so, with the inevitable crash in motion, we now have all the clone troopers, including Jesse, who is basically leading a squad of clones to try and stop Ahsoka and Rex from escaping the crashing ship. And with him now being portrayed as the main villainous clone, this was a really unexpected turn, but the escape sequence and all the attempts to stop the escape are really exhilarating. And this provokes the inevitable crash landing where sadly the clone troopers do die upon impact, and both Rex and Ahsoka bury every single clone with their helmets basically representing the final resting place. And this was a fantastic way to close Ahsoka's known story in the Clone Wars, showing really how far we have progressed from her really irritating character in the Clone Wars movie, now coming full circle to where she actually survives the Clone Wars. And the end scene after this with Vader really is the ultimate payoff, showing Anakin's descent as well. And the way the music turns towards the end, and throughout the entire season really as a whole, is overall phenomenal, just dropping that end cut to credits as we see the buried Ahsoka clone trooper helmet within the snow. This was a wonderful way to bring the Clone Wars to an end, but thankfully at least some of the characters still have stories to be told, so there is always more potential in the near future. And so, trying to leave this review on a somewhat high note, thank you for watching my review on the Clone Wars final season, as well as taking a look at my custom-made Blu-ray release. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments what was your favourite episode out of the final season of the show. Let me know also what you think of this custom-made Blu-ray set. Are there any other amendments you feel I should make to this? And for more videos, be sure to subscribe.
Are you threatening me?